So hello everybody, of course, welcome back to Python for Beginners. Now, um, even though this is just a new series, I am already getting spam in the comments, so I'm being duly diligent and I have turned off comments. So if for any reason you need to get in touch with me, just send me an email and that will all work just fine. So with that being said, I'm going to try to slowly walk through each of these tutorials step by step so that they are as clear as they can possibly be. And with that, you are gaining some really good experience getting into Python programming. So as you can see now, I am looking at using comments. And so all of these are comments because you can see the hash or what we used to call the pound sign. And I'm using comments simply to identify what's going on in each particular section of my code. Now, this time, I'm using the for loop structure. In the previous tutorials, I used the while loop, and we took a look at while, and then we increment it while something is less, while a number is less than whatever, and for our example was 10, um, which evaluates to true, run the loop. But then inside of the loop, we have to change the value of I. We have to increment it up by 1 or by 2 or by ever increment value we want to. And that just changes the current value of I. And so while in the while loop expression, it's evaluating I is less than 10, 2 is less than 10, 3 is less than 10, and so forth. That runs as true up until I is 10. Now, we typically maintain the while loop structure to evaluate for a Boolean condition, true, false. While true, execute the loop. When another condition comes up, we either use the break statement or we change the Boolean value to false, and you've seen me do that. The for loop structure is more structured in terms of that count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 through 100, it's looking to count things. And so we typically use the for something in range line of code. And so that's what you see going on here for number in range. And then I have a parentheses, and then I have a starting point, comma, and an ending point. Okay, I've done it here for my first for loop. I've done it down here for my other for loop. But down here, I just gave a number. How many times do I want to iterate through that loop? And down there is 3. So let's take a look at the code one line at a time. And so we've done this before. We've imported the time module. So this is going to allow me to delay or sleep or just kind of pause the program for a couple of seconds. I'm using it here. I'm using it again here. I do like to use it in the classroom setting, such as this, in my looping structure so that you can see that it's actually doing something. Otherwise, it would just pop, 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 pop. It would just, give all that output, but really not appreciating the fact that it's going through a loop. This time, it looks like, oh, okay, it's counting. It's counting pretty slowly, but it's counting. And so that kind of works for me. So I do it in this for loop, I do it in this for loop, I do it in this for loop. It's not a requirement for coding to do that, unless of course it's part of the problem that you're trying to solve. I just like doing it so that we can see the loop execute, that we know something is going on the back end. And that's the only reason why I do it for example purposes. So when we run this program, it's actually not going to do anything for 2 seconds because time.sleep 2 seconds is really right there. Let's take a look at the first looping structure. For number in range, so for blank in range will always be that code structure for whatever in range, for whatever in range. It could be for I in range, it could be for num in range, it could be for whatever. Now, at a certain point, we're actually going to create lists in Python. And so this is going to run through all of the items in that list. And so you can see how valuable that will be as well. So this is kind of an introduction to iterating through a list or an array and things of that nature. And like, I don't want to get too much ahead of myself, but we know that we could, identify. Don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's just learn how to use the for loop structure and see what's going on. So I do start with 1 and I end with a 5. Now this will start the count at 1, not 0, because I did say started at 1. So this will be inclusive. The 5 is not inclusive, which means that this will iterate through 1, 2, 3, and 4 and stop. Okay, and this number indicator, this is number, it's the same variable. It's going to tell me where I am in that loop count. So the number is, or the count is, I could easily say the count is count, stop, count again, stop, do it 4 times. This print statement, and I don't even need the quotation marks here, this is an empty quotes, simply gives me a line between that output and my next output. I'm going to sleep for 2 seconds. And this one says for number in range 0 through 4. So just like before, I have an inclusive starting point, a non-inclusive ending point. So this will iterate 0, 1, 2, 3. Still 4 times, because I do want I still want that 4th loop, but this time I'm going to add a number 1. That's an int, 1's an int, so 1 and 1 will add. The first value is 0, so 0 plus 1 is 1, and so it'll say loop count is 1. Then it will say loop count is 2, 3, and 4. So we will see 4 loops, each with a 1-second delay. However, it looks different than this because we typically start a looping structure at the count of 0. And we just keep that in mind. We have an n-1 value in mind because this is going to be the n-1. And in order for us to get a readable readout, we just add 1 to the increment, knowing that that's what structure, or that's what iteration we're on. Sorry. Again, I'm going to print out a line. It's completely empty. And I'll change that to 2 as well. And like I said, this time I simply want to say, how many times do I want to iterate through? I want to iterate through 3 times. This loop is on a 2-second delay. I should see that print out 3 times. That's it. That's what your for loop does initially. We're going to take a look at some other things, but this is a good place to start. The for loop with an inclusive first digit, non-inclusive second digit. For loop, inclusive first digit, non-inclusive second digit, telling us that we still want those 4 iterations. So I could easily do 5, 6, or 7, right? I get the 7th loop, but I just won't get, I'll stop at 6, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then finally, number in range 3 times. Let's see how this executes. And perfect. So let's see if it matches up with what we have. So 1, 2, 3, 4. right? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not including the 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inclusive of first, not inclusive of 5. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. But I add 1 to the increment value starting at 1, so I do get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. And then 3. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, that looks good, and it works, and that's what we want. Okay, hopefully this was of value to you. I'll see you next time.